Matthew Cole hadn't worn jeans to work in over 2 decades. As the CEO of Brightline Technologies, he was known for his sleek, tailored suits, always crisp and commanding, just like the company he built from the ground up. But today, he stood in the employee parking lot at 5:30 in the morning, wearing a worn-out hoodie, faded denim, and sneakers that hadn't seen daylight in years. It was all part of his yearly tradition, going undercover under a false identity to observe life on the front lines. This time, he posed as a new temp hire in the customer support division at the company's primary operations center. Matthew had always believed in staying connected to the roots of his organization, and nothing offered more clarity than walking a mile in his employees' shoes. Over the years, his undercover stints had uncovered everything from outdated systems to toxic middle management. But on that cold October morning, something entirely different caught his attention. Something that would shake him to his core. As he walked toward the building, a faint cry stopped him in his tracks. It wasn't loud or urgent, but it carried the unmistakable tone of an infant. Turning toward the sound, he noticed a silver Honda parked in the corner, partially concealed behind a recycling bin. The windows were fogged, and a small movement from within made him pause. Inside, he saw a woman gently cradling a baby. She rocked the child carefully, her eyes tired but focused. Matthew's instinct told him to call security. Unauthorized people sleeping on company property usually warranted action. But then something made him look again. He recognized her. She was an employee, Rachel Adams, a customer service representative who had joined the company about 8 months prior. Matthew had studied the personnel roster during his prep, and her name stood out to him now with a different weight. Through the misty window, he watched as Rachel calmly changed her baby's diaper using a portable warmer, then prepped a bottle with practiced hands. Her movements weren't frantic or unfamiliar. They were routine, refined by repetition. This wasn't a one-night emergency. It was a life she had adapted to. A car that had become a nursery. And a parking lot that had become a shelter. As Matthew followed her from a distance, he noticed how Rachel moved with quiet efficiency. She strapped her daughter, maybe 6 months old, into a baby carrier, picked up a diaper bag and a company-issued laptop bag, and headed toward the building. She walked past him without a second glance, unaware that the man she had just passed was her CEO in disguise. Rachel paused briefly to drop off her baby at the daycare center. A benefit Brightline offered, but one Matthew hadn't imagined would serve as a literal lifeline. She kissed her daughter's forehead with a gentle tenderness that tugged at something deep within him, before greeting the daycare staff with a warm smile. Inside the break room, Matthew observed Rachel from afar. There was no trace of fatigue or burden in her demeanor. She chatted with co-workers, offered a smile to everyone she passed, and even helped a confused new hire locate the training module login. She disappeared into the bathroom for a few minutes and re-emerged, looking as composed as any professional in the building. Her uniform was neatly pressed, wrinkled in places but clean. Her hair was tied back into a tidy bun, and her name badge sat straight on her chest. No one would guess that she had woken up in the back seat of a car just 2 hours earlier. As training sessions began, Matthew purposefully chose a workstation beside her. Under the alias Matt Carter, he watched and listened. Rachel's customer interactions were filled with empathy, professionalism, and genuine warmth. She wasn't just doing her job, she was excelling in it. Her customer satisfaction scores were among the highest in the department. She never complained, never rolled her eyes at a difficult caller, and never shied away from helping others. She offered to cover extra shifts, explained new processes to her teammates, and used her lunch breaks to read company materials on her tablet. What struck Matthew most wasn't just her competence, it was her grace. Her life, he began to realize, was a delicate balance of survival and service. And yet, Rachel never asked for pity. She didn't demand recognition. She simply showed up and gave her best, day after day, while living through circumstances that would have broken most people. As Matthew walked back to his rental car that evening, he felt the weight of what he had witnessed settle heavily on his shoulders. The company he had built had given Rachel a job, but had it truly seen her? Had he? That night, under the dim glow of the streetlights, he made a silent promise. He wouldn't look away, not this time. Matthew's undercover assignment quickly turned into something far more personal than he'd anticipated. In the days following his first encounter with Rachel, he made it a point to sit near her, observe her habits, and quietly learn from the person everyone else took for granted. She arrived each morning before the lights were even fully on in the office, her daughter in tow, bundled in a carrier and half asleep. Rachel would sign in at the daycare, hand over Lily with a soft whisper and a gentle smile, then head to her desk with a cup of lukewarm break room coffee in hand. No one seemed to notice that she was always the first one to log into the system, nor that she was often the last one to leave at night after finishing up reports or helping a colleague troubleshoot a difficult ticket. Her performance spoke louder than any resume. Rachel's customer satisfaction ratings consistently topped the department averages. Difficult callers didn't rattle her. She had a calming tone and a quiet confidence that turned tense moments into positive outcomes. New hires often hovered near her station, and she always had time to explain the nuances of the CRM or show them how to navigate Brightline's often confusing back-end interface. One afternoon, when a trainee accidentally deleted a client's order history, Rachel didn't scold or panic. Instead, she helped recover the data with a mix of patience and encouragement that turned an embarrassing mistake into a teachable moment. She didn't just do her job, she elevated the entire team. What surprised Matthew most, however, was how she spent her breaks. While others scrolled through social media or caught up on personal calls, Rachel took out a worn laptop with a cracked corner and opened a coding tutorial. Sitting quietly at the corner of the cafeteria, she juggled between learning JavaScript, brushing up on system architecture, and scribbling notes into a weathered spiral-bound notebook. Matthew once caught a glimpse of the book's cover. It was labeled "One Day," underlined twice in fading pen. He later learned from small talk that Rachel spent her evenings at the local public library, using their free Wi-Fi to attend virtual coding boot camps. Her dream was to move into Brightline's technical support division, a place where she felt she could grow and contribute more meaningfully. In one quiet moment during a late shift, Matthew found the courage to casually ask her about her goals. She didn't hesitate. Her eyes lit up as she talked about wanting to learn back-end systems, maybe even work with the engineering team someday. "I know I don't have a degree," she said, tucking a strand of hair behind her ear, "but I believe in learning by doing. Tech is all about solving problems, right?" Her voice was steady, but there was a flicker of vulnerability there, a quiet hope that someone might believe in her enough to offer a chance. Matthew nodded along, concealing the knot that had formed in his throat. In his executive world, he often spoke about grit and innovation. Yet here was someone living those values every day, without any spotlight or recognition. By the end of the first week, Matthew no longer saw Rachel as just an impressive employee. He saw her as a living embodiment of the company's mission statement. Brightline claimed to empower people through technology, to create opportunity where others saw limitations. But Rachel was the one embodying that vision, not the leadership team. He started noticing things he'd never seen before. How shallow some corporate initiatives felt compared to the quiet impact of one determined woman. Rachel had no fanfare, no LinkedIn accolades, no mentor advocating for her, and yet she showed up each day with kindness, humility, and a ferocious commitment to building a better life for her daughter. One evening, as Matthew sat in his car watching employees exit the building, he saw Rachel leaving with Lily, holding her daughter close while balancing a laptop bag on one shoulder and the diaper bag on the other. She moved slowly, deliberately, never looking over her shoulder for help. The parking lot light flickered above her as she unlocked the back door of her Honda and began her routine, installing sunshades, adjusting a battery-powered fan, and laying out a clean blanket for Lily. The contrast was jarring. By day, she was one of the top performers in the company. By night, she returned to the life of someone fighting just to stay afloat. And yet, Matthew couldn't recall a single complaint from her lips. Not once had she asked for sympathy or special treatment. That night, he sat in silence for a long time, reflecting on the quiet power of someone who had every reason to give up, but never did. The more Matthew Cole observed Rachel Adams, the more a troubling realization settled into his mind. She was slipping through the cracks. Despite her work ethic, her attitude, and her potential, no one in management had taken the time to see what she was truly going through. Her loyalty to Brightline Technologies was clear, but loyalty, Matthew knew, could come from different places. Was Rachel committed because she genuinely believed in the company and its mission, or was she simply surviving, clinging to the only job that had offered her a chance when others turned her away? He needed to know. Not for show, not for a headline, but because the culture he'd worked so hard to build hinged on this one truth, that people stayed, not just out of need, but out of belief. And so, he designed a test, a quiet, precise, ethically grey experiment that would either confirm his instincts or break them. He called Regina Walsh, his trusted executive assistant of nearly a decade, and gave her the most delicate assignment of her career. "We're going to offer Rachel a job," he said, keeping his voice low as he stared at her name on the screen of his tablet, "but not from us, from a rival company. And it needs to feel real." Regina raised an eyebrow, but didn't ask questions. She knew how Matthew operated: meticulous, intentional, and always for a deeper purpose. Over the next 72 hours, they crafted a complete backstory. Regina would pose as a senior recruiter from Nova Edge Corp, a fictitious but credible competitor in the tech support space. The documents would be real, the figures accurate, the opportunity tempting. And the condition? Immediate resignation from Brightline and quiet disclosure of any insights she had into their systems. It happened on a Thursday afternoon. Rachel had just returned from feeding Lily during her lunch break, her uniform still bearing the faintest trace of baby formula on the collar despite her best effort to scrub it out. Regina intercepted her near the break room, her appearance sharp and commanding in a tailored navy suit. "Rachel Adams," she asked with professional warmth, "do you have a moment? I represent Nova Edge Corp, and we've had our eye on your performance metrics for a while now." With a confident smile and a subtle flick of her wrist, she motioned Rachel into an empty conference room and laid out a folder on the table. Inside was a job offer most entry-level reps could only dream of. $75,000, 0 cents a year, nearly double Rachel's current salary, plus full benefits, comprehensive pediatric coverage for Lily, and 3 months of paid rent in a corporate housing unit. It was enough to solve every immediate crisis in Rachel's life, with one signature. Rachel stared at the papers, her fingers trembling slightly as she turned the pages. "Is this real?" she whispered. Regina nodded smoothly. "Very real. We value talent over credentials. Your customer satisfaction scores, de-escalation skills, and leadership potential, these aren't easy to find." Then, after a well-timed pause, she leaned in, voice dropping just enough to register as confidential. "There's just one catch. We need someone who can start immediately. No notice. We're launching a competing customer support platform, and your experience with Brightline systems would be invaluable, but," she added with a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes, "this conversation never happened." From a hidden room behind a one-way mirror, Matthew watched everything unfold. His heart pounded, not with excitement, but with fear. This wasn't a game. He knew what he was asking of her. The offer was real enough to change her life, and the implications, though never stated outright, were clear. Nove didn't just want Rachel's skills. They wanted what she knew. Her knowledge of Brightline's internal tools, escalation procedures, and perhaps even system vulnerabilities. It wasn't espionage on paper, but in spirit it danced dangerously close. Would she betray the company that had been her lifeline? Or would she walk away from everything she desperately needed just to stay true? Rachel sat in silence for what felt like an eternity. The pages before her glistened under the soft overhead light. Her thumb brushed the corner of the contract where the salary figure was bolded. With this money, she could finally get Lily out of that cold parking lot. She could buy a reliable used car, furnish a proper home, afford every vaccination and checkup without stress. But then Regina spoke again, reiterating that the offer wouldn't be available tomorrow. "We need a decision now," she said. "Our internal launch window is tight, and discretion is paramount." Rachel's eyes shifted from the offer to the woman across from her. Something about the rush, the secrecy, it reminded her of promises made and broken in the past, of Lily's father, of manipulation wrapped in opportunity. She closed the folder gently. "I appreciate the offer," she said softly, "but I'm going to have to decline." Regina blinked, caught slightly off guard. "Would you like more time to think it over?" "No," Rachel replied, this time with firmer conviction. "Brightline gave me a chance when no one else would. They didn't ask about my past. They saw potential that matters more than a paycheck." In the observation room, Matthew exhaled for the first time in minutes. His hand trembled slightly as he picked up his phone and typed a single message. "Proceed with Phase 2." Rachel had just passed a test she didn't even know she was taking. But what she didn't know yet, what no one did, was that her act of integrity had just changed the course of her future. That evening, as the last rays of sun dipped below the city skyline, Rachel sat quietly in the driver's seat of her old Honda Civic, watching the lights flicker on inside the Brightline building. The manila folder from Nova Edge rested on the passenger seat, its corners slightly bent from where she had nervously clutched it during the meeting. The numbers inside echoed in her mind like a siren song. $75,000 a year, comprehensive benefits, corporate housing, and a chance to finally breathe. Her heart had raced the entire walk back from the break room, and now, sitting in the dim silence of her makeshift home, she could feel the full weight of the decision pressing against her chest like a stone. The parking lot had grown cold, and Lily slept peacefully in the back seat, bundled in 2 layers of blankets, her tiny fist still clutching the corner of the only stuffed animal they owned. Rachel glanced at her daughter, then turned back to the folder. The offer was everything she had dreamed of during the hardest nights, the ones where she questioned if she was doing the right thing, if she'd ever escape this cycle. With that contract signed, she could be out of the car by the weekend. Lily could have her own crib, her own room, her own window with a view of the world. Rachel opened her phone and pulled up her banking app. $47.81. That wouldn't even cover diapers for the week, let alone food and gas. The numbers from Nova Edge sparkled in contrast, cold and clean and almost too good to be true. But the more she thought about it, the more the edges began to fray. The rushed timeline, the whispered tone about keeping this quiet, the vague references to using her familiarity with Brightline's internal systems. Rachel was no fool. She'd heard enough in that small, sleek conference room to know what they were really after. And while it hadn't been spelled out directly, the implication was clear. Nova Edge didn't just want her skills. They wanted her access, her knowledge, maybe even her trust. It was the same kind of pressure she'd felt years ago when Lily's father made grand promises wrapped in conditions, when help came with a hook. Rachel knew that pattern, and this time, she had the strength to see through it. She looked around the parking lot, the same one where she had cried herself to sleep the first night they arrived after the eviction. But over time, this place had become something else. It was where she had built routine out of chaos, where she had kissed Lily goodnight 100 times under the same flickering street lamp. It was also where she had found purpose. Brightline hadn't judged her. When she applied, no one asked about her housing status or why she didn't list a permanent address. They looked at her willingness to learn, her drive, her humility. They had hired her when no one else would, and over the past 8 months, they had treated her like a person, not a project. She remembered Jenkins at the daycare, who always slipped her an extra bottle just in case. She remembered the co-worker who brought her coffee every Tuesday morning, and she remembered Matt, kind, quiet Matt from training, who always made sure her headset was plugged in before the session started. With her laptop propped against the steering wheel and Lily softly breathing behind her, Rachel opened a new email draft. The cursor blinked in the subject line for a long time before she finally began to type. Dear Ms. Walsh, thank you for the generous offer from Nova Edge Corp. Her fingers hesitated again, but the words that followed flowed naturally. Truthfully, she explained that while the opportunity was undeniably attractive, Her principles and gratitude toward Brightline meant more than any short-term gain. She wrote about loyalty, about what it meant to be trusted, and how she could never look Lily in the eye, knowing she compromised her integrity for a paycheck. She reread the email twice, took a deep breath, and pressed send. The ping of confirmation echoed through the car like a quiet promise. Outside, thunder rolled in the distance, and Rachel reached back to tuck the blanket more securely around Lily. She glanced at the dashboard clock. 9:47 p.m. Tomorrow would be another long day, but for the first time in weeks, she didn't feel the gnawing weight of uncertainty. The decision she had made, though difficult, was hers. No one had swayed her. No one had manipulated her. She had chosen clarity over confusion, conviction over convenience. And in that moment, she realized that Brightline hadn't just given her a job, it had reminded her of who she really was. Not just a mother fighting to survive, but a woman capable of making the hard choice, the right choice, even when no one was watching. The following morning, Rachel arrived at Brightline Technologies feeling a strange kind of calm, one she hadn't felt in months. The weight of the Nova Edge offer had lifted the moment she sent the rejection email, and while she still didn't know what the future held, she felt proud of her decision. She clocked in like usual, greeted the front desk with her usual smile, and dropped Lily off at daycare with an extra long hug. But as she made her way toward her desk, her inbox pinged with a new message. The subject line made her stomach flip. Urgent. Please report to Executive Suite 1500 immediately. It was from HR. She stared at the email for a long moment, her fingers frozen above the keyboard. She'd never been to the 15th floor, few customer service reps ever had. As the elevator ascended past the familiar floors, Rachel's mind raced with worst-case scenarios. Had someone found out about her living situation? Had she accidentally violated a policy without realizing it? Or, somehow, had word of the Nova Edge offer reached management? When the elevator doors opened, she stepped into a space that didn't feel like part of the same building. Marble floors, panoramic windows, sleek furniture. Before she could fully process it, a familiar figure stepped into view. Rachel froze. Regina? The recruiter from Nova Edge stood there, but now she wore a Brightline Technologies badge. Welcome to the 15th floor, she said with a warm smile. Please, follow me. Rachel walked numbly behind her into a massive conference room, and there, seated at the head of a long table, was someone she never expected to see. Miss Adams, the man stood, his voice steady and kind. Please, have a seat. It took her only a moment to recognize him, not as a CEO from a portrait on the wall, but as the man she'd trained beside, who offered her extra coffee, who always helped reset her headset. Matt, she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. The man smiled, this time without the practiced neutrality he wore during training. Matthew Cole, he confirmed. But I've grown quite fond of just being Matt lately. Rachel sat down slowly, stunned into silence as he took the chair next to her, not across from her. I owe you an apology, he said gently. What we asked of you wasn't fair, but I needed to know not just what you could do under pressure, but who you were when no one was watching. Matthew explained everything, the undercover operation, the fabricated offer from Nova Edge, and how the entire encounter had been carefully designed to test her principles. It wasn't about loyalty to me, he said. It was about loyalty to yourself, to your values, and you passed with more integrity than I've seen in this building in a long time. Rachel listened, still trying to reconcile the man she had laughed with during onboarding sessions with the CO now sitting beside her. It felt surreal. She wanted to ask 100 questions, but couldn't find the words. Matthew reached into a folder, not unlike the one Regina had shown her, and slid it across the table. This one's real, he said, and it comes without strings. Rachel opened the folder with trembling hands. At the top was her name, but the title below made her stop. Director of Customer Experience Strategy. She blinked, wondering if she was reading it wrong. Then came the rest. A salary that tripled her current pay, immediate enrollment into the company's executive housing program, full childcare support, and equity shares in Brightline. Her hand went to her mouth, tears threatening to fall before she could even speak. "This isn't charity," Matthew said firmly, as if reading her thoughts. "This is recognition, for showing us who we should be looking to for leadership." He leaned forward slightly. "We don't need another polished executive who talks about values. We need people who live them. You've already been doing that." Rachel didn't know how to respond. The emotion came in waves: shock, gratitude, disbelief, pride. She thought about Lily and the nights they'd spent curled together in the back seat of the Civic, about the cold mornings, about the decision she made just 12 hours ago, alone in the dark, unsure if anyone would ever know or care. And now here she was, being offered not just a new role, but a new life. "Are you sure?" she finally asked, her voice cracking. Matthew nodded. "Absolutely. But there is one catch. This role starts now. We have a board meeting in an hour, and I'd like you to join me to discuss our next steps for customer strategy." Rachel let out a breathless laugh, wiping at her eyes. "Then, I guess, I better get moving." As she left the conference room, new offer in hand and heart still pounding, she looked once more at Matthew Cole. Not as a CEO, not as an undercover co-worker, but as the man who saw past her circumstance and gave her the platform she had only dared to dream about. And for the first time in years, Rachel didn't feel like she was catching up. She felt like she belonged, and as the elevator descended toward the floors below, she straightened her shoulders and smiled, not just for what was behind her, but for everything that lay ahead. Later that evening, as twilight wrapped the city in a soft orange glow, Rachel stood at the entrance of her new apartment, though apartment hardly did it justice. Located just across the street from Brightline's headquarters, the executive suite at Brightline Towers was spacious, modern, and already furnished with care. When the door opened with a soft click, Rachel stepped inside, her breath catching as she took it all in. Polished wood floors, soft recessed lighting, and a scent of fresh linen greeted her like a quiet promise of peace. In one hand, she held Lily's car seat. In the other, just a single suitcase and a diaper bag. It was all she had. And yet, here was a space that felt like it had been waiting for them all along. She walked slowly from room to room, overwhelmed by the detail. The kitchen was fully stocked. The living room had books and toys neatly arranged on low shelves. But it was the nursery that stopped her cold. The walls were painted a calming seafoam green, adorned with framed prints of stars, moons, and smiling animals. A brand new crib stood beneath a mobile of silver clouds, and a plush rocking chair sat nestled beside a window that overlooked the city. On the dresser sat a welcome card, handwritten in careful script, "To Lily. Your future is as bright as your mother's courage." Rachel knelt beside the crib, placing Lily gently inside. The baby stirred, blinked once, then smiled in her sleep, as if she too could sense the change in their world. The next few days moved like a dream, yet Rachel approached each moment with both gratitude and determination. Brightline assigned her a personal mentor, Regina Walsh, no longer posing as a recruiter, but now revealed as a senior executive with years of strategic experience. Regina met with her daily, helping her transition from customer service floor leader to director-level thinker. Alongside her, a financial advisor walked Rachel through her new compensation package, explaining stock options, savings plans, and how to finally build the future she had never dared to plan for. There was even a company concierge who helped arrange everything, from grocery deliveries to setting up Lily's pediatric appointments. Every logistical burden that once consumed her days was quietly lifted, giving her the mental space to breathe and to lead. Her calendar, once filled with shifts and overtime hours, was now lined with meetings, presentations, and brainstorming sessions. Rachel joined the executive roundtable the following week, sitting beside men and women who had once seemed worlds apart from her life. At first, she felt the pang of imposter syndrome creep in. She still remembered the rust on the underside of her car, the way her back ached from sleeping in cramped seats, but every time doubt surfaced, she reminded herself that she hadn't been given anything. She had earned this, through perseverance, integrity, and quiet leadership. And soon, others began to notice. Her ideas were sharp, practical, and always rooted in empathy. She advocated for better training resources, flexible schedules for parents, and restructured customer feedback loops that prioritized the human voice over scripted metrics. During one particularly impactful meeting, she presented a plan to revamp the customer experience journey by integrating frontline insights directly into product development. "No one understands pain points better than the people answering the phones," she said, her voice steady and clear. The room went quiet, not out of doubt, but out of realization. She wasn't speaking from theory or analytics. She was speaking from lived experience, from weeks of holding a crying baby while learning code in the back seat of a car, from long days of solving customer issues while never once letting her own struggles show. And that kind of insight, Matthew Cole later told her privately, was something even the brightest MBAs couldn't replicate. By the end of her first month, Rachel had fully stepped into her new identity, not just as a mother or survivor, but as a builder. She didn't simply want to thrive, she wanted to lift others with her. She made it her mission to identify employees like her, those who worked hard but lived in the shadows. With Regina's help, she began designing a framework for a program that would later be called Second Wind, a comprehensive support system that provided emergency housing, childcare, financial literacy, and career mentoring to frontline workers in need. But even amid the long hours and new responsibilities, Rachel never lost sight of what mattered most. Every night, after the last email was sent and the meetings were done, she returned to that soft green nursery, picked Lily up from her crib, and whispered stories to her daughter about courage, kindness, and what it means to hold your head high, especially when the world tells you to bow. Rachel Adams had once believed that the most powerful thing a company could give someone was a paycheck, but as the weeks passed in her new role, she realized the truth ran deeper than numbers on a payslip. Brightline Technologies had given her something far greater: dignity, belief, and a second chance. And now, with a leadership seat at the table and a voice that was finally heard, Rachel knew she couldn't be the only one. There had to be others, quiet warriors just like her, showing up every day, carrying invisible battles while keeping their heads down and their hearts steady. She couldn't rest until they were seen, supported, and given the tools to rise. And so, she began to build something bold, something personal, something that would change Brightline forever. She called it the Fresh Start Initiative. The name came to her late one night while watching Lily sleep under the soft mobile of stars above her crib. The program's goal was simple but radical: to identify employees in crisis, those experiencing homelessness, financial hardship, or caregiving challenges, and offer them real, immediate support, not just in words, but in action. The initiative would provide transitional housing, emergency childcare coverage, transportation stipends, and access to counseling and mentorship. It wasn't about charity, it was about potential. Rachel worked closely with HR, facilities, and finance to carve out budget lines, convert unused office spaces into safe housing pods, and partner with local service providers for food, legal aid, and medical care. She wasn't asking for approval, she was building a legacy. But what made the Fresh Start Initiative truly different was Rachel herself. She didn't lead from an office tower or a spreadsheet. She led from lived experience. Every applicant who entered the program met with her personally. She sat across from them, not as a director, but as someone who had once eaten lunch in her car with her baby beside her. She shared her own story: the offer she turned down, the parking lot that became home, the email that changed everything. And as she spoke, she watched people soften. Guards dropped. Shame dissolved. They weren't being judged, they were being understood. For many, it was the first time they felt truly seen, not as liabilities, but as leaders in the making. And for Rachel, every conversation was a mirror, a reminder of who she had been and why this work mattered. The impact was felt almost immediately. In just the first 6 months, more than 40 employees were enrolled in the program. Some had been couch surfing for years, some were single parents juggling 2 jobs, others were veterans struggling with re-entry into civilian life. But across the board, one trend became clear. When given a lifeline, people didn't just survive, they soared. Retention among Fresh Start participants skyrocketed to over 90%. Many of them went on to receive promotions, leadership training, and lateral moves into departments that better matched their skills. Brightline's internal culture began to shift. Managers paid more attention. Co-workers checked in on each other. And Rachel's name began to spread, not just as a symbol of resilience, but as a catalyst for cultural change. One story stood out above the rest. A young warehouse employee named Marcus, who had been living in his car with his teenage brother after their parents died unexpectedly. Rachel found him reviewing safety protocols at a break room table late one night. She brought him into the program, connected him with grief counseling, and helped enroll his brother in a mentorship school. Within a year, Marcus was promoted to safety supervisor. At a town hall meeting, he spoke publicly for the first time. "I thought I was just a number," he said, his voice shaking. "But someone saw me. Someone believed I could be more." The room fell silent, then erupted in applause. Rachel sat in the back, eyes brimming with quiet tears. She didn't need the spotlight. She just needed to know it was working. By the end of her first year as director, Rachel compiled a report for the board. It didn't just list numbers. It told stories, real names, real journeys, real transformations. And at the top of the document, in bold letters, was her opening line. "We don't lose people because they're weak. We lose them because we never gave them room to grow." The board read in silence, then voted unanimously to expand the Fresh Start initiative company-wide. Rachel had done more than launch a program. She had proven that integrity, when empowered, could reshape the DNA of an entire corporation. And as she stood before the employees at the annual meeting, Lily now toddling beside her in a tiny Brightline t-shirt, Rachel smiled and said, "My story isn't unique. It just got noticed. Let's make sure others are, too." 5 years had passed, yet the memory of that cold October morning when Rachel Adams sat silently in her car, holding her sleeping daughter, wrestling with an impossible decision, remained vivid. Now, standing at the front of Brightline Technologies' annual shareholders meeting, she was no longer the quiet customer service rep in a wrinkled uniform. She wore a tailored suit, stood beneath the banner that bore her name, and held the title of Vice President of Employee Impact and Culture. Whispers in the hallways and even among board members had grown louder. She was the leading candidate to succeed Matthew Cole as CEO upon his planned retirement. But for Rachel, the destination had never been the goal. It was the people she met along the way. The lives changed, the voices empowered, that defined the path she had taken. The applause was still echoing when the velvet curtain lifted to reveal a new wing of the Brightline campus, the Adams Empowerment Center. Designed as a sanctuary for employees in crisis, the center featured transitional housing units, round-the-clock childcare, legal counseling rooms, job training labs, and even a rooftop garden where residents could gather for community meals. Rachel walked through its doors for the first time with Lily, now a confident 6-year-old, by her side. Inside, a plaque read, "For those who rise with integrity and lift others as they climb." Matthew Cole stood quietly nearby, his proud smile needing no words. "You didn't just survive, Rachel," he told her softly. "You rewrote what leadership looks like in this company." But Rachel never let the accolades distract her from the work. She made it her mission to meet every new cohort at the Empowerment Center personally, sitting with them over coffee, asking about their dreams, and sharing her own origin story not as a fairy tale, but as a roadmap, paved by tough choices and quiet courage. She'd often say, "I wasn't rescued, I was recognized." Her belief in people, especially those overlooked by traditional systems, became the cornerstone of Brightline's evolving culture. Promotions weren't just about performance anymore. They were about purpose. Metrics mattered, but so did empathy, resilience, and a willingness to serve. Rachel's leadership style was unorthodox by corporate standards. She insisted on open office hours. She sat in on exit interviews. She kept her desk in a shared workspace, surrounded by mid-level managers and rising interns. When asked why, she would simply respond, "You can't lead what you don't touch." Under her guidance, the company's retention rates soared, employee satisfaction reached record highs, and diversity within leadership roles tripled. But perhaps her greatest impact couldn't be measured in charts or annual reports. It was the shift in spirit. The way people spoke to each other, the way teams listened, the way Brightline had become more than a workplace. It had become a community. Outside the glass walls of the Empowerment Center, a young woman named Clarissa, once homeless, now a department supervisor, hugged her son goodbye before walking into work. Nearby, an older employee who had once battled addiction now led mental health seminars for others. A single father, once on the brink of resignation, now mentored new hires through Brightline's Fresh Start 2, an expansion of Rachel's original initiative. These stories weren't rare exceptions anymore. They were the culture. And at the center of that culture stood Rachel, not dictating from above, but nurturing from within. She knew that leadership wasn't granted through promotions. It was earned through presence, through showing up, even when no one's watching. That night, after the ribbon-cutting ceremony, Rachel returned to her office to find a simple manila folder on her desk, an echo of the one that changed her life 5 years ago. Inside was a formal nomination from the board of directors, Chief Executive Officer, Brightline Technologies. Her eyes paused on the last sentence, unanimous vote, pending final acceptance. But she didn't reach for her phone. She didn't draft a press release. Instead, she turned her chair to face the window, where the lights of the Empowerment Center glowed across the courtyard. Lily's laughter floated up faintly from the garden, where employees and their families gathered for evening community dinner. Rachel smiled, not because she had reached the top, but because she had helped build something that would outlast her, a legacy not of power, but of purpose. Thank you for watching another powerful story from deep inside HQ. If this story moved you, if it made you reflect, inspired you, or reminded you of the strength within us all, please take a moment to like, share, and subscribe to our channel. Hit the bell icon so you'll never miss a new release. And consider sharing this video with someone who needs to be reminded that integrity, kindness, and quiet courage still matter in today's world. At Deep Inside HQ, we don't just tell stories, we uncover what truly matters, and together, we're building a community where truth, empathy, and justice have a voice.